Married to the Ruthless Mafia Boss, or Part 2, The Monster's World. The first lie I believed was that silence meant safety. In his world, silence meant preparation. The house never slept. It only waited. Every hallway listened. Every door remembered. And the longer I lived inside it, the clearer it became that my presence had not softened anything. It had simply changed the rules. I was not brought here to be loved. I was brought here to be contained. Before we continue, if you want more stories that make the hair on your neck stand up, go ahead and subscribe to Honey's Romance Stories. Give this video a like and share it with someone brave enough to hear the truth. Because once the bell rings, you'll never know what might be waiting for you next. By the third night, I understood the schedule better than the staff. No clocks were visible, yet everything ran on time. Footsteps arrived when they were expected. Lights dimmed without instruction. Voices lowered themselves before entering certain rooms. This place did not need orders. It operated on memory. I learned quickly that questions were dangerous, but answers were worse. So I listened. I watched reflections instead of faces. I learned which silences meant approval and which meant consequences were already decided. Behind the polished marble and the curated art, something colder shaped every movement. A system built long before I arrived. A system that did not break people loudly. It wore them down gently, until resistance felt unnecessary. The man I had married was rarely seen, but always present. His absence was louder than any command. When he entered a room, conversations did not stop. They dissolved, as if sound itself knew better. There were rules I was never told. I was expected to learn them by surviving mistakes. Do not linger near the West Wing after dusk. Do not speak to the drivers unless spoken to. Do not ask why certain rooms remain locked. Do not touch the phone by the study door. And above all, do not assume you are alone, even when the room is empty. This was not a home. It was a holding structure, a carefully managed environment where fear did not shout. It whispered patiently. At night, the walls carried echoes that did not belong to the present. Not voices exactly, more like reminders. Proof that others had passed through these corridors and learned the cost of misunderstanding their role. I realized then that marriage was never the point. It was access. Control wrapped in ceremony. A contract signed with vows instead of ink. I had crossed into a world where affection was a liability and obedience was mistaken for peace, where protection and captivity wore the same face. And though no one said it out loud, the message was clear. I was inside the center of his world now. And once inside, leaving was no longer a decision. Life under observation continued. Every morning followed the same pattern. Breakfast was served without conversation. Security rotated in shifts I was never told about. Doors opened only after a pause, long enough to remind me they were never unlocked by accident. The staff addressed me politely, formally, like someone whose position could disappear overnight. I noticed the way conversations stopped when I entered a room. Not because of respect, because of instruction. My name carried weight now, but not the kind that protected. At first, I told myself this was discipline, order, the cost of living beside power. That explanation was easier to swallow than the truth. I was being measured, every step recorded, every habit cataloged. every reaction studied, as if it revealed something useful. The cameras were discreet, but carelessly hidden things reveal the most. A mirror angled too precisely. A hallway light that never turned off. A guard who already knew where I was headed before I changed direction. Privacy existed only as a courtesy, and courtesies could be revoked. Yet in the middle of all this control, something complicated began to take shape. Something that did not belong in a place like this. Him. He never raised his voice, never rushed his movements. He spoke rarely. And when he did, the room adjusted itself around his words. Our interactions were brief, measured, almost professional. But there were moments, small ones, that unsettled me more than the surveillance ever could. A pause before he answered me. The way his gaze lingered, not possessive, but assessing, as if deciding whether I was fragile or dangerous. The subtle shift in his posture, when others spoke to me too, casually. He never touched me without reason. That, somehow, made every accidental brush feel deliberate. This was not romance the way stories promise it. There were no confessions, no tenderness offered freely. What existed instead was tension, unspoken and constant. A quiet pull between fear and curiosity. I began to realize that love, in his world, was not something you gave. It was something you allowed to happen under strict conditions. And I didn't know yet whether I was being protected from that world or slowly introduced to it. At night, when the house settled into its watchful stillness, I replayed every conversation we'd had, every look that lasted a second too long, every silence that felt heavy with something unfinished. I told myself not to read meaning into restraint, but restraint, when sustained long enough, starts to feel intentional. I was living under observation, but so was he. And somewhere between the rules, the distance, and the constant awareness of danger, a dangerous question formed. Was I a prisoner learning to survive? Or the one thing in his world that had not yet learned to obey? The world he ruled continued. I did not see his work. I felt it. Cars arrived late at night. Engines cut before the gates fully closed. Doors opened quietly, as if sound itself had learned discretion. Men left before sunrise. Some returned. Some did not. No one ever asked where they went. No one ever explained why fewer came back. He never explained what he did. He never needed to. Power announced itself through absence. When he walked through the house, everything adjusted around him. People stood straighter, voices lowered, eyes dropped. This was not fear. This was conditioning. I began to understand that his influence did not begin at the door of the house. It extended outward, into streets I would never walk, rooms I would never enter, decisions I would never be allowed to question. He ruled without spectacle. No shouting. No threats. Just expectation. And expectation, when enforced long enough, becomes law. The staff did not gossip about him. They shared logistics, arrival times, clearances, what was allowed and what was untouchable. His name was never used casually. It was treated like a switch, flipped only when necessary. I realized then that love, in a place like this, could not arrive loudly. It would have to move carefully, quietly, almost unnoticed, because anything visible could be taken, and anything valuable was always monitored. There were moments when I caught glimpses of the man beneath the structure, not through confession, but through contradiction. He would pause in doorways, listening to conversations he did not interrupt. He would correct a guard quietly, never in front of others. He would notice things no one expected him to. A chipped glass, a misplaced book, the way my steps slowed when I passed certain rooms. He never asked if I was afraid. He watched for signs. That was how he handled everything, by observing first, acting later. And then there were the rare moments when his attention rested fully on me, not as an obligation, not as possession, but as consideration. Those moments were brief, almost fragile, and dangerous, because they made me forget, for seconds at a time, the scale of what surrounded us. They made me imagine that power could coexist with restraint, that control could make room for choice. But this world did not reward imagination. It tested it. I learned that loyalty here was not proven through devotion. It was proven through silence, through endurance, through the ability to witness and remain still. And yet, despite everything, something unfamiliar grew between us. Not trust, not comfort, recognition. Two people shaped by very different forces, occupying the same space, aware that proximity itself was a risk. He ruled his world completely. I could see that now. And the most dangerous truth of all began to surface. In a world where nothing was left to chance, my presence had not been accidental. A warning disguised as protection continued. One afternoon, I wandered too far. Not intentionally, just curiosity mistaking itself for courage. A guard stopped me at the end of a hallway I hadn't seen before. "You can't go there," he said. He didn't reach for me, didn't raise his voice. He simply stood between me and the corridor, as if the space itself had instructed him to exist there. I apologized before I realized I was doing it. That night, my husband spoke to me about it. Not angrily, not loudly, almost gently. "There are places in this house that exist, so you don't have to know what happens inside them," he said. Then he added, "You're safer when you don't ask." It sounded like advice. It was a boundary. He said it while pouring a drink, his back to me, as if facing me would make the words heavier. As if this was not a warning meant to frighten, but one meant to settle quietly into my memory. I asked him why those places existed at all. He didn't answer immediately. That pause told me everything I needed to know. Because worlds like mine don't stay standing without rooms no one wants to see, he said finally. There was no pride in his voice. No apology either. Just fact. That was the night I realized protection, in his language, did not mean safety from harm. It meant safety from knowledge. And knowledge here carried a cost. Yet even as he drew the line, he did something unexpected. He moved closer. Not enough to touch me, enough to make his presence undeniable. "You don't belong in those places," he said, softer now, "not because you're weak. Because once you see them, they start to see you back." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. I understood then that his rules were not arbitrary. They were scars turned into architecture, mistakes built into hallways and locked doors. This was how he loved. By limiting exposure, by controlling distance, by deciding what truths I could survive. And the dangerous part, the part I didn't admit to myself yet, was that some part of me believed him. After that night, he became more present, not warmer, more attentive, He noticed when I didn't eat, when I slept poorly, when my steps hesitated in places that felt too quiet. He never asked what I was thinking. He watched for changes instead. In return, I began to notice him. The weight he carried without complaint. The moments when his guard slipped, not into softness, but into fatigue. This was not romance shaped by freedom. It was romance shaped by restraint, by proximity that could not afford carelessness. We existed beside each other, carefully, two people aware that one wrong question could undo everything. And yet, in that careful distance, something grew. Not trust, not yet, but awareness. He was protecting me from his world. And slowly, without saying it, I realized he was also protecting his world from me. The first dinner with guests continued. The first time he hosted a dinner, I understood my role more clearly. I sat beside him, quiet, observed. The chair was positioned perfectly, close enough to signal unity, distant enough to remind everyone where authority rested. The table was long, heavy, polished to a shine that reflected faces like fragments of truth no one wanted examined too closely. The men at the table laughed carefully. Their humor never lingered. Their smiles never reached their eyes. They chose their words with precision, not because they feared being misunderstood, because they feared being remembered incorrectly. I watched how they waited for him to begin eating before touching their plates, how no one interrupted him, how disagreement never appeared as opposition, only as suggestion. This was not a gathering. It was a demonstration. One of them addressed me directly. "Does she know?" he asked. The question was casual, almost polite, as if asking whether I preferred wine or water. The room went still. Even the staff paused at the edges, frozen mid-motion, as though the air itself had been instructed to hold. My husband placed his hand on the table, not on mine, flat against the wood. "She knows what she needs to," he said. His voice didn't harden. It didn't rise. That was what ended the conversation. No one asked a follow-up. No one looked at me again. I was not a partner. I was a perimeter. I existed to signal where lines were drawn. What was untouchable? What was already claimed? And yet, beneath that role, beneath the performance, something unexpected unfolded. He did not use me as a shield. He did not parade me as proof of ownership. He used restraint. When one man's gaze lingered too long, my husband did nothing at all. No correction, no warning. The gaze disappeared on its own. I understood then that his power did not require constant enforcement. It lived in anticipation, in memory, in what had already happened to others. As the evening continued, I felt his awareness beside me, subtle, constant. When the conversation edged too close to violence, he shifted topics. When a voice sharpened, his glance dulled it. When the room grew heavy with implication, he reached for his glass, slowly, and everything eased. He was managing the temperature, not for himself, for me. That realization unsettled me more than fear ever could. Later, when the guests had gone and the house returned to its quiet vigilance, we remained at the table. The candles burned low. The untouched plates cooled. "You did well," he said. It was not praise. It was acknowledgement. I asked him what I needed to actually meant. He looked at me then, really looked at me. It means, he said, that you're still able to sleep at night. There was something in his expression then, not softness, something closer to conflict, as if part of him wanted to explain more, and another part knew explanation was a door that did not close again. That was the shape of our romance, not built on promises, built on withheld truths. I began to see the pattern clearly after that night. When he stood between me and his world, it was not always to keep me small. Sometimes it was to keep me unchanged. And the danger, the quiet, unavoidable danger, was that I was starting to care why. Control without chains continued. He never locked me in my room. He didn't have to. Every exit required approval. Every plan required permission. Every movement left a trail. Freedom was theoretical. What unsettled me most was his restraint. He never threatened me. He never had to. The system around him did that for him. I learned quickly that control did not announce itself through force. It lived in anticipation, in the pause before a decision, in the way options narrowed before I even voiced them. If I mentioned wanting fresh air, a car appeared. But with a driver, I didn't choose. If I admired a cafe from the window, it was closed the next day, relocated, or suddenly irrelevant. If I spoke of visiting somewhere unfamiliar, the idea dissolved into logistics so complex it felt irresponsible to insist. Nothing was forbidden outright. It was simply made impractical. That was his genius and his burden, because chains can be resisted. This could not. And yet, he never used it to humiliate me, never reminded me aloud of what I lacked. Instead, he offered proximity, dinners together, when the house was empty, late evenings where silence felt less like surveillance and more like shared space. Moments where he would sit across from me, jacket discarded, guard lowered just enough to suggest exhaustion rather than weakness. He listened more than he spoke. When I talked about my past, he didn't interrupt or correct or reshape it into something useful. He let it remain mine. That mattered more than I expected. I began to notice the care embedded in his control, not kindness, precision. Routes were cleared before I traveled them. Rooms were emptied before I entered. Conversations were redirected before they reached me. He was not limiting my world to punish me. He was narrowing it to protect something fragile. And the unsettling truth was this: that fragile thing might have been me, or it might have been him. Because the longer I stayed, the more I realized how alone power makes a person, how every interaction becomes transactional, how trust is replaced by verification. Except with me, he never verified me. He watched, he waited, and slowly, against all logic, he began to relax the edges. Not the rules, never the rules, but the distance. He would stand closer when we spoke. He would allow silence to stretch instead of ending it. He would ask questions that had no strategic value. Did you sleep? Did you eat? Did the house feel heavy today? These were not commands. They were check-ins. And in a world where everything was measured, that felt dangerously intimate. One evening, I asked him why he trusted me. He didn't answer right away. That pause, the one I had learned to fear, returned. Because you still look at this place like it's temporary, he said. People who plan to stay forever stop noticing the walls. That was when I understood. He wasn't afraid I would escape. He was afraid I would adapt, that his world would change me the way it had changed everyone else. Quietly, irreversibly. Control without chains works because it convinces you that you are choosing stillness, that you are safe because you are compliant. That survival is the same as peace. And the romance, the dangerous, impossible romance, was not in defying him. It was in the way he kept asking himself whether he should let me go. The basement truth continued. I never saw what happened below the house, but I heard enough to understand. Late one night, voices carried through the vents, not shouting, not pleading, instructions, measured, sequential, delivered the way one reads a checklist aloud to ensure nothing is missed. Then silence, the kind that doesn't echo, the kind that arrives complete. The next morning, the house felt lighter, as if something unresolved had been settled, as if a weight I hadn't known I was carrying had been removed without my consent. Staff moved differently, not hurried, efficient. Eyes avoided mine more carefully than usual. I did not ask what had happened. I did not need to. Power leaves fingerprints, even when it cleans up after itself. He noticed my unease before I spoke. He always did. You don't have to be afraid, he said. The words were calm, practiced, the kind meant to close a subject gently. Then, after a pause, he added, fear keeps people alive. He didn't look at me when he said it. That mattered, because when he wanted to persuade, he held eye contact. When he wanted to warn, he did not. I realized then that what happened below the house was not an exception. It was maintenance, the invisible labor required to keep his world intact. And I was standing above it, protected by distance, by ignorance, by him. That was the contradiction I could no longer ignore. He ruled through consequence, but he loved, if this could be called love, through containment. He never denied what he was. He simply refused to let it touch me directly. That night, sleep did not come easily, not because of fear, because of proximity. I understood now that the danger was not just the world he commanded. It was the care he exercised in separating me from it. That kind of care creates dependency. It blurs lines. It makes protection feel like intimacy. And intimacy, here, carried risks no one could afford. In the days that followed, he grew quieter, more inward, as if something beneath the house had taken more than time to resolve. I caught him standing near the basement door once, not guarding it, just there. I asked him if he was all right. He considered the question seriously, as if it deserved accuracy. Some things, he said, don't disappear just because they're handled. That was the closest he ever came to confession. I wanted to tell him that I knew, not details, not names, just the truth of it, that I understood the cost of the silence he carried, that I felt the weight of what he absorbed, so I wouldn't have to. But acknowledgement would have changed the arrangement. It would have made me complicit, and he had gone to great lengths to prevent that. This was the quiet tragedy of us. He was trying to preserve something untouched inside me, and in doing so, he was isolating himself further inside a world that never forgave weakness. The romance did not live in gestures. It lived in omission, in what he chose not to share, in what he refused to let me become. And standing above the basement truth, I realized the most dangerous thing of all. If I stayed long enough, I would stop being afraid. And fear, as he said, kept people alive. A moment of humanity continued. There was one moment, just one, when the mask slipped. I cut my hand on broken glass in the kitchen. It wasn't deep, just sudden, the sharp surprise of pain-breaking routine. Blood startled me more than the injury itself. A reminder that I was still physical in a house that treated people like positions. He was there instantly. I never heard his approach. 1 second I was alone, staring at my hand. The next, his presence filled the room with quiet authority. He took my hand, no hesitation, no questions, wrapped it carefully. His touch, steady, precise. This was not the way someone touched something they owned. This was the way someone handled something they could not afford to damage. For a second, just one, his focus was entirely on me. Not the house, not the rules, not whatever calculations usually lived behind his eyes. Just me. I felt it in the way his grip adjusted to my breath, in the way he checked the cut twice, as if accuracy mattered more than speed. In the silence he allowed to exist without filling it. That silence was different, unmanaged, uncontrolled, human. Then it vanished. You need to be more careful, he said, concern disguised as instruction. He released my hand immediately after, as if holding on longer would have revealed something irreversible. But the moment had already happened, and moments like that do not disappear just because they are brief. The rest of the day unfolded as usual. Schedules resumed, voices softened, the house returned to its waiting. But something had shifted. I began to notice the effort it took for him to maintain distance, the way he kept conversations short afterward, the way he positioned himself farther away than necessary. Control reasserting itself, not over me, over himself. That was when I understood how dangerous closeness was for him. Power demands consistency. Emotion disrupts it. And yet, despite his restraint, he checked on my hand later that evening. Didn't mention it directly, just asked if I needed anything. That was all. No apology, no tenderness offered openly, just presence. Romance, I was learning, does not always arrive as warmth. Sometimes it arrives as vigilance, as attention disguised as routine, as care hidden inside caution. I realized then that his warnings, his rules, his boundaries, they were not only designed to protect me from his world, they were designed to protect his world from what he felt in moments like that. Because once the mask slips, even briefly, it becomes harder to pretend you are untouched. And for a man whose power depended on appearing unmovable, that was the greatest risk of all. That night, lying awake in a room that had never truly been mine, I replayed the moment again and again. Not the pain, not the blood, the focus, the care, the second where nothing else existed. It was not a promise. It was not hope, but it was proof. Proof that beneath the structure, beneath the discipline, beneath the control without chains, there was still a man capable of reacting before thinking. And once you see that, once you feel it, you can never unsee it. The mask had slipped, and now I knew what it was hiding. What the contract really meant continued. That night, I reread the contract again. Not because I expected to find something new, but because I finally understood how to read it. The language had always been clean, neutral, almost reassuring. Obedience was framed as protection. Loyalty was framed as survival. Every obligation was disguised as care. Every restriction introduced as necessity. There were no exit conditions. Not because they had been forgotten, because they had never been intended. Marriage had not secured my future. It had absorbed it. I saw it now. The elegance of the trap. No threats, no punishments written in ink. Just permanence. The contract did not describe a life together. It described containment, emerging so complete that separation was no longer a concept. I had not been promised happiness. I had been promised continuity. As long as I stayed, the world would remain orderly. As long as I complied, I would remain untouched. As long as I did not ask, nothing would demand answers. That was the bargain. And the most unsettling realization came quietly, without panic. He had never hidden this from me. I had just lacked the context to understand it. The clauses about residence, about communication, about discretion, they were not written to restrain love. They were written to control damage. Because his world did not collapse when people left. It collapsed when they spoke. I closed the document slowly, my hands steadier than I expected. Fear would have been easier. Fear would have meant clarity. What I felt instead was something more complicated. Recognition. This contract was not designed for trust. It was designed for endurance. And somehow, without admitting it aloud, I realized he had expected me to read it this way eventually. That was the cruelest kindness of all. He had given me the truth early, knowing I wouldn't see it until I was already inside. I thought of the way he watched me, not suspiciously, patiently, as if waiting to see which version of me would survive. The one who resisted, or the one who understood. Love, in ordinary stories, is chosen freely. Here, love was something that emerged under pressure, shaped by constraint, tested by proximity. And against my will, I had begun to recognize his language. He did not offer reassurance. He offered stability. He did not promise forever. He engineered it. The romance was not in grand gestures or spoken devotion. It lived in the way he removed threats before they reached me, in the way he absorbed consequences so I wouldn't have to, in the way he never pretended this world could be softened, only navigated. That was when the truth finally settled into place. I had not married a man seeking companionship. I had married a man building a closed system. And inside that system, I was both the constant and the vulnerability. The contract did not bind me to him emotionally. It bound me to the consequences of his life. And the terrifying, undeniable thing was this. Somewhere between the warnings, the boundaries, the careful distance, and the moments he lost control just long enough to show care, I had stopped asking how to leave. I had started asking what it would cost him if I ever tried. The moment everything changed, continued, before dawn, an alarm sounded. Not loud, intentional. A tone designed to wake only those who already understood what it meant. He was already dressed, not hurried, not tense, prepared. There's going to be noise today, he said calmly. Stay in your room. It wasn't a request. It wasn't fear. It was logistics. I watched him fasten his cufflinks with the same care he used when pouring a drink or wrapping my hand days earlier. Precision. Even now, especially now. I asked my first real question. Am the first in danger? He looked at me for a long moment, not calculating, not distant, present, not from me. That was all. No reassurance beyond that. No promise layered underneath. Just truth, delivered cleanly. The door closed behind him. Not slammed, not rushed, sealed. And for the first time since I arrived in that house, clarity arrived without resistance. I was living inside a world that existed long before me, and it would continue, with or without my consent. The sounds began an hour later. Not screams, not chaos, movement, cars, footsteps, voices clipped and controlled. Something large unfolding beyond the walls I was told not to leave. I sat on the edge of the bed, hands folded, heart steady in a way that surprised me. Fear would have been simpler. Fear would have meant distance. What I felt instead was connection, because I knew, without seeing anything, that whatever was happening, he had already decided where I stood in it. Outside the consequences, inside the protection. That knowledge should have comforted me. Instead, it changed everything, because it meant my safety was no longer incidental. It was intentional, and intention carries weight. Hours passed. Time stretched and compressed in strange ways. The house moved around me without acknowledging my presence, like a body protecting a vital organ. No one checked on me. No one spoke. They didn't need to. I was not forgotten. I was accounted for. When the noise finally faded, it did not end abruptly. It receded, like something concluding rather than collapsing. By the time he returned, the sun was high. He looked the same, unmarked, contained. But something in his posture had shifted, not weakened, resolved. He didn't ask where I'd been or what I'd heard. He didn't warn me again. Instead, he sat across from me, close enough that the silence between us felt deliberate. "It's over," he said. I didn't ask what it was. I asked something else. Was it always going to happen? He considered that carefully. "Yes," he said, "just not today." That answer stayed with me, because it revealed the truth I'd been circling for weeks. This was not a life shaped by reaction. It was shaped by inevitability. And loving someone like him, if this was love, meant living alongside events you were never meant to influence. Romance, I realized then, was not the promise of shared decisions. It was the acceptance of shared consequences. He reached for my hand, not urgently, not possessively, briefly, as if checking that I was still real. "I told you fear keeps people alive," he said, "but clarity keeps them steady." That was the moment everything changed, because I finally understood my place in his world, not as leverage, not as decoration, but as the one thing he removed from the equation before making choices he could never undo. And once you realize someone is rearranging their world around you, not to soften it, but to keep it functioning, you face a choice no contract can define: to remain untouched or to step closer, knowing exactly what that costs. That morning, as the house settled back into its quiet vigilance, I understood something else just as clearly. I had crossed the point where ignorance protected me. From now on, staying would be a decision, and leaving would be one too. The beginning of understanding continued. After that morning, the world inside the house shifted subtly. I moved with more awareness, spoke with more intention, not out of fear, but out of understanding. He never lowered his guard completely. I did not expect him to, but sometimes, late at night, I would catch a glimpse of the man beneath the empire, the one who could hesitate, who could care, who could notice without demanding. The romance we shared was strange, unspoken, measured, shaped more by what was withheld than what was given. I learned that love here did not arrive with declarations. It arrived in seconds. The way he remembered a detail I thought I had overlooked. The way he allowed me space when proximity would have been easier. The way he protected me without pretending to soften the world around us. And in those moments, I realized how deeply complicated attraction and fear could be. How dependency could grow from trust without surrender. How intimacy could be crafted out of vigilance. I began to understand him in ways no one else ever would. Not fully, not completely, but enough to see the cracks beneath the perfection of control. Because even the strongest men have moments of human vulnerability. Even the most calculated rulers have a private code they never reveal. And I was learning it. Slowly, carefully. Engagement questions. Drive, comments, and discussion. Do you think she will ever truly trust him? Or is this world too dangerous for that? If this story keeps you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like, share, and subscribe to Honey Romance Stories channel for more intense, emotional, and unforgettable love stories. Every comment, every share, and every subscription helps keep these real-life romances alive. And we want to hear your thoughts. The story isn't over yet. Part 3 of Married to the Ruthless Mafia Boss cracks in his armor is coming, and the secrets he hides will finally begin to unravel. The danger is closer, the romance more complicated, and nothing will ever feel safe again. Don't miss a moment. Like, share, and subscribe to Honey Romance to witness every shocking twist as it unfolds.